Hey guys, it's Robin, RsIslandCrafts, and welcome to my craft room. This week we are going to finish up our placemats. I've gone ahead and finished, well not finished, but I've gone ahead and worked on some quilting on the next batch that I'm doing. I like to use warm and white. It's 100% cotton. There's a warm and natural, but it's more of a beigey brownish color, like it's like a dirty white almost, and sometimes it has, the natural might have the little bits of cotton still in it. And I like how smooth, and I like the white. I prefer not to work with something that already looks dingy to me. I kind of like the white. Now, I picked this one up online at Joann's. They were having a sale, and this one is, let's see, it's considered a craft size, 34 inches by 45 inches. I cut all 4 placemats out of it and still had some left over, and I believe this was only $4.99 for this package at Joann's. I don't remember if it was on a sale or if I used a 20% off, but if you watch, a lot of times the batting will go on sale, and that's a good time to stock up. If you're not making large quilts, then stocking up on these smaller ones is a really great idea. And then if it comes time that you're making a large quilt and you don't have anything in the larger size, you can go ahead and franken-batting it and stitch it together. And these are really large pieces, so it's not that bad to stitch a couple of these together. So let's take a look at some of the quilting that I've done. I went ahead and I decided, since I have red and blue on the top, that I'm going to make 2 of my quilts with the red backing, which will then give me 2 red bindings, and I have 2 blue. And I thought that'd be a nice little mix-up instead of having all blue or all red, because like I said, I've got red and blue here. So on my red ones, I went ahead and I used red thread on the top and bottom, so that when I bring it around to the front like I showed you last week, it won't be as noticeable of any of my little spots that are there. So I did a little free motion one on this one. If you hang on a little bit, I'll take you over to the sewing machine and I'll show you how I quilted these. So I have my red one free motioned, and I also have my blue one free motioned. Now I only free motioned them in the white sections. Down through here, I went ahead and did some free motion straight lines, and I'll show you how I did that, because basically instead of switching out my feet constantly, whatever one was in, that's one I used. So I had a free motion foot in, so I just used it and I went down along the ditch. I also did some straight line. Now I don't have a walking foot, so yes, you'll see a little bit of a puckers here, but I'm hoping when I wash it, since it's a cotton batting, it tends to get all a little bit crinkly anyway, so that'll kind of blend all in and it won't be a problem. And then I also did this red one, and I kind of just wanted this one to be more into the points of triangles and kind of like laser lights going out, however you want to look at it. I just went with the angles-ish of the pieces that were already cut, and as you can see, I only have 2 pieces in this one of my strips. And I used 3 of the calculator strips on this one. I still used 3. And then on this other one, I used 2. And as you can see, both of the red ones are the ones that have 2. And I thought that was just kind of a little bit whimsical. Now, if this is a little bit too much for you and it's like, woo, and it's not as modern as you want, whatever strips you use here is going to determine the feeling of it. And of course, your background fabric. The more white you use, I've heard that's the more modern it looks. So if you want to just use white thread to quilt this, it'll be perfectly fine. Like I did with my original sample, you can see the lines, of course, but it's all white quilting thread, so it doesn't stand out as much. You're going to see more of this. But since we already had this example, I just wanted to also give you an example of what it could look like if you go a little crazy. Let's go pop over to the machine and I'll show you how I quilted these, and then when you come back, we'll go ahead and discuss how to trim them up. Hello. So I had a request to show me actually quilting the placemats when I quilt them. I've already quilted my blue versions, and I did some straight line quilting on this one. I'll either show you these in greater detail later, or you will have already seen these because I'm filming the quilting before I finish the rest of the video. And then I did some wiggly squiggly freeform on this other one. Then I have 2 more that have the red backing, and I'm going to do straight lines on one of those and squiggly wiggly freeform quilting on this one. I have my Fons and Porter quilting gloves. They have these, oh I'm sorry, it's a little dark over here. They have the little grips. These are about worn out, but you can hear they have these little rubber grips all over the gloves and not just on the tips. I really like these. They're not super hot, but I like that they have See those grippies? Those are all over the palms also. There you go. So they're all over the palms of the hands, all over the fingers, and it allows me to grab my quilt and hold it and move it like this. If you free motion with me before, you'll know that the feed dogs in my machine, when I put them down, they like to stay down. So I just go ahead and tape a piece of cardboard over it. You can do the same thing by dropping your stitch length down to 0. This is just the way I've always done it, so this is the way I still do it. I have to put a special foot on my machine, a free motion foot. I have red thread in the top and the bobbin because I want the red to show here, and since I have red on the back, then it's fine for me. I just have some straight pins in here that I'm going to stab myself with repeatedly just to hold everything in place. When I first started pinning these, I wasn't going to free motion them. Then I decided I wanted to do a couple free motion and a couple with straight lines. The thing to be careful with when you're doing something like this, since we have our backing that's actually larger than the top, you have to be careful you don't get this folded under at all when you're quilting, especially on the corners. You want to make sure before you move around that you can see all of the backing in the areas that you're working, because it's really easy to get it tucked under, and then you'll have quilting that goes all the way through, and it's really annoying to pick it out. I just pick an edge, put my foot down, and I bring my thread to the top. That way I know I'm not going to quilt over the tail of my thread from my bobbin underneath. Even though I'm doing free motion, I'm still going to use my back stitch button, and I'm going to secure this in place so that the stitch doesn't pull out. The thing about free motion quilting, you want to move your hands and your foot pedal speed and move the quilt around at about the same speed. If you go too fast, you'll get what they call eyelashes, and on the back of your quilt you'll have your top thread, but your bobbin, or vice versa, I'm not sure which it is, will have long lines like eyelashes on a person's face. So it's good to practice, and placemats are really great things to practice on. Before I start a new session of free motion quilting, I always practice on a little piece of scrap, even if it's just fabric without the batting, just so I get my hands and my feet coordinated again, and then I come into my project. If I were doing a regular quilt, sometimes since I have extra batting and backing over here, I'll just practice a little over in the dead space that I'm not going to be using in my quilt that I'm going to trim off. But since I'm using my backing as my binding, I'm not going to be able to do that. And then I just kind of wiggle and wobble. You can cross over your lines if you want, or don't cross over your lines. It's personal preference. You can make your squiggles and wiggles large or little. You can do both on the same quilt. Sometimes I would like to quilt hearts and stars and words into my free motion quilting. I don't know if you could see over here, but I like to take this section of the quilt, well, the placemat, since it's extra in the way, I just kind of wrap it around my hand like this, and that way I can push this quilt and I know it's out of the way. If I was doing a full-size quilt and I was in the middle, it wouldn't be a problem, but anytime I'm near the edges, this is just something I tend to do. Or I'll just roll it up and put my hand on it, and I kind of take my hands like this and spread everything out, even if I have it pinned to death. That way I'm keeping everything out of the way, and I can just go crazy. After I get moving just a little bit, and then I can come up and cut these threads so I can get them out of my way. Now the little trick I've learned when I'm free motion quilting, if I have to stop, when I start back up, I make sure I let 1 or 2 stitches start in this one spot before I start moving the quilt around, and that way I don't end up with longer stitches. Like if my stitches are normally like this, I might get a longer one. On a project this small, I'm just kind of taking my fabric and moving it around with my hands. It allows me to just kind of, like you see, wiggle and wobble all over. Normally with a quilt I would just run off the edge and that would finish it, but here I'm going to go ahead and backstitch again. Just to hold that in that one spot. You see how the quilt moved? I forgot to hold it, but my binding is going to cover that, so it'll be okay. And there you go. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on both sides. And then I'll show you what I'm going to do with the strips. Now in these scrappy strips, I could have easily just quilted all over that, but I didn't want to get red thread on the blue and blue thread on the red. So I'm going to leave those as that, just like that. But I'm going to go ahead and take a straight line down these sections. Now, I could easily just take my machine back to being standard to regular straight line stitching, or I can just go ahead and leave it on free motion, and I can just kind of glide along the side, being very careful to stay. It's not going to be a straight line. I'm not that good without using a ruler, but I'm just going to kind of free flow along the side, and hopefully it'll come out straight enough that it won't make me cry. Now I'm going to try to just follow just in the ditch inside this white line. I'm going to try not to get it on the white because it would be obvious then that I went over the edge. I'd rather err a little to this side than to this side. Make sure everything's out of the way. Now I'm going to go a little slower here than I would down the sections here. This one I can kind of go all helter-skelter, but through here I want to have that semi-straight line. Remember the organic quilting? It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to work for this project. When I have to stop to readjust my hands, I like to stop on a darker fabric or one that matches the thread. So if I do have a little blurb, when I start back up, it won't be as noticeable as if it was in this light blue. Kind of hard to stretch your arms all the way through. You have to remember, the slower you stitch, the smaller your stitches are going to be. The faster you stitch, the longer they are. So you don't want to sit here for too long in one spot because you're just going to be pounding a bunch of the thread into one area. So you got to find that nice smooth rhythm. And then I spin it to go the opposite direction so that the fabric will lay neatly and it won't get too crunched up. I found for me also with the free motion quilting that I used to drive my sewing machine. When I put my foot on the pedal, I used to just drive with my foot down lower and just use kind of my toes. But for free motion, I like to put my entire foot on the pedal. I seem to have better control of my speed that way. Now, if you have any questions about free motion quilting, Leah Day is the expert. She has a YouTube channel and a blog. I will try to go ahead and link it for you. And she's the master. She has a wonderful course that she takes you through all the different types of free motion quilting, all the designs you can do. And she's got plenty of tips and tricks. And plus, as we know here on YouTube, it tends to be a lot about how the person speaks, and I just love listening to her voice. And she's a very good teacher. If I can find it, I'll try to pop up the video because our sweet little Laura Lynn from the Mom and Pop Quilt Show actually had an interview with her. There you go. I'm going to go ahead and set my machine up for straight line stitching, and I'll show you the next placemat. Now I'm going to do some straight line stitching on the second red one. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to follow, once again, I could follow in the ditch, or I could follow just outside, or I could do both if I wanted to. On my first blue one, I did follow in the ditch, and then I went outside it, just outside these seams that from when I pressed it out that way, I went ahead and just stitched just past that. Basically what it is I used the side of my presser foot and I used that as my guide, and I just ran it along this white edge and I stitched over there, and I'll probably do the same thing again. I still have the same red thread in my bobbin that I do in the top of my machine. I think I'll go ahead and stitch inside this ditch for now. I still like to bring my needle to the top, on my thread to the top. Stitch a couple stitches. Back stitch to secure it. The only reason I'm securing it is because the binding is going to be separate. It's going to fold over. If we had a separate binding that would cover the top and the back, it would cover the stitches. This time we're bringing the binding over, so I want to make sure that those threads aren't going to be flying around anywhere. As my sewing machine gets older, it's not feeding as well, so sometimes I have to I put a little force to the back. I don't pull it, but I put a little tension to it, and it seems to help it glide through easier. If you've got a better machine than mine, you don't have to worry about that. You can just guide it through like this. Little back stitch. Now I'm going to go ahead and spin it around and take it back down this way, and that'll keep everything from kind of getting twisted and off kilter. Now remember, if you're concerned about your stitches from your quilting showing up when you bring around your binding from the back, you want to start at least a ½ inch, mostly an inch away from the edge. Me, I'm still just going crazy and I'm stitching all the way from edge to edge. This time I'm using red thread on red backing so it won't show up as much. Quilting has guidelines. I don't want to say rules, but they have certain guidelines, and you can stretch those guidelines. And if you don't want to do exactly what everyone else says you should do, try it for yourself. And if it works for you, then I say go for it. As you see, quilt police would not like it at my house. Well, they would be very busy filling out lots of paperwork because I don't follow their rules. I was reading comments the other day and someone called me Robin the Rebel. I kind of thought that was really funny. I am. I do what I enjoy. And I don't let anyone else tell me how things should or shouldn't be. When I give a gift of a quilt, my friends and family really enjoy it and love it, and that's all that matters to me. It's made very well, so I don't follow the exact rules. That's okay. I think I've always been a rule breaker. When working something like this, if you want, you can still go ahead and wear your gloves. It'll help you guide it through. I'm going to go ahead and finish up quilting this, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about the centers. See, it wasn't as hard as you thought, right? Like I said, any type of quilting, any of the stitches in your machine, straight lines, whatever works. You can go this way. It all depends on how you've already made your placemats. If you're following along with me and you're using the calculator strips, this is the way I decided. I thought this would look kind of fun. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we need to trim all the extra batting off, but we have to be very careful that we're not going to cut into our backing fabric. Now some people will take it and just, you could, if you took a stitch line right along here, then you'd have a nice fold line to go against. I have all this freeform quilting, so I can just still push it back against there. Now I could pin this all the way through here, and that would keep it out of the way, which is a good safety thing. And then I can choose to take my rotary cutter and ruler and just go right along the edge of the fabric. That scares me. No matter how well I pin it back, I'm always concerned that it's going to pop forward. My sewing scissors are just basic scissors that I picked up at Walmart. They're nice and sharp, but they don't have an over sharp point. It's actually kind of flat up here. So what I'm going to do with mine is I'm just going to follow along the edge here, and I'm going to keep my backing down this way so I know exactly where it is, and I just make sure that I'm never digging into that backing fabric. Now they have those nice sewing scissors that lay flat on the table, so when you're cutting out fabric for, I think a lot of the dressmakers, clothing makers use them. So then you can just ride along the edge and it'll keep it nice and secure. But I do pretty good with my shears like this, these scissors. So I just start at the edge, give it a little snip, and I do a lot of this, holding over here with this hand and cutting with this way. So I'm going to try to do it without doing that so I don't block your view. I'll just take it nice and slow and easy. If you want, you can hold it up. Now I don't have my scissors actually on the table anymore. I'm kind of holding this up, and the batting is kind of keeping it up because I have this extra piece off here and it's keeping the backing out of the way. You're going to have to find your own rhythm. Try a couple different things, go nice and slow. And remember, if you oops and slip up and cut into the backing, just go ahead and square up your whole project, trim it all the way around, and just go ahead and make regular binding for it. You're not going to really ruin your project. You're still going to be able to make use of it. See? Now, this one's a pretty thin piece of batting, but I do save these because these are really great to use in a key fob because you need something that's about an inch or less thick width. And so I do save these. I have a special container that I put these in. I have one for my larger pieces of batting and one for my smaller. Who wants to cut into a big twin-sized piece of batting when all you need is a little strip? And I'm just going to go ahead and keep trimming up through here. This side doesn't have as much batting. I would say through the whole process that this is the one that you want to go the slowest and be the most careful. Even without using your rotary cutter, if you wanted to, you could still pin back your backing to keep it out of the way while you're doing the scissor trimming. This is one of my starting or stopping points, so it's making it a little more difficult to trim. That's what the directions were saying. That also, if you kept your quilting an inch in, it makes it a lot easier to trim. Now this one's not too bad because for the most of the time I stayed away from the edge. But when we get to the straight line ones, that's going to be a little bit harder to trim up. Just because I can't actually pull it away from my backing as easily. So once again, I'm going to start real gentle here. If you go past, if your quilting happens to go past your edge of your top here, you might have to, well, you probably will be better off taking your seam ripper and unpicking it a little bit, because once it goes off into here, you're not going to be able to trim off your batting without picking out those seams. And if you have a little piece of batting sticking out afterwards when you're done, just go ahead and fold everything back. You're only going for this one little section, so maybe we can be very careful. I'm also keeping my finger there so it keeps everything out of the way. So there we go. It is all trimmed up. Now the next step will be to trim the backing. Now remember, you've had to already make this decision, unless you use really wide and you gave yourself a few inches all the way around on your backing. You had to have already decided how much of a backing and binding you want. Now I'm going to go with the 1 inch, which is going to give me a 1/2 inch folded over, and then I'll fold it up one more 1/2 inch. So I'll have a scant 1/2 inch of binding around it. So all the way around this quilt, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim up 1 inch from this edge. Now when I lay my ruler on here, I can kind of see that I'm almost nice and even along here. I do have a couple little spots where the fabric is pulled down during the quilting, but basically since I did the meander all over it and I stayed away from the edges, the edge of this quilt has turned out really well. So I can just go ahead and pick the main points, try to match up. I try to match up at one end and the other for the 1 inch mark, and make sure maybe about 50% of the points that are lined up throughout there. If it's a little bit off, I might have to pull through it a little bit, but it seems pretty good, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut it 1 inch from the edge. And I'm definitely going to save this amount of scraps for my scrap bin. Once again, I line up my sides, hold a nice pressure. Whoops, did you see that? I almost cut it right even with this edge. I am so used to doing that. Was anyone screaming? I'd have been screaming. Okay, so 1 inch from the edge. Oh, if you want, you can take and put some painter's tape or some washi tape or any type of a reminder, some post-it notes. Put it right along this 1 inch mark, so as you're going around, you don't revert back to autopilot and start trimming everything evenly like I almost did. Whew, that was a close one. Told you, this is the first time I've done this right along with you, so autopilot. Alright, so I have it trimmed 1 inch all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and get my iron set up, and I'll show you how we're going to fold it over. If during this process your backing has gotten any type of wrinkles or dings or dents in it, go ahead and press that out right now. Our first step is going to be really easy. We're just going to have this edge right here. We're going to fold it up and let it meet the edge of our quilt. Now, it does help a little bit if you go ahead and put some starch on this, but you can do it without. I'm going to be holding mine in place with my little clover clips, or you can use pins. You can do it without ironing, but I find it's easier if you iron this first step specifically, and then the next step helps also. But you could do it without if you'd like. You should probably at least finger press it along. Okay, so I just fold it up, get myself started a little bit, and then I just glide my iron through. If you want, you can give it a little steam. It's like pressing your binding regularly, you're just doing it actually on your project. And I go right to the edge, no problem. Then we're going to take this section and then we're going to fold it right up onto our quilt. Now that we have this folded over, I'm just going to go ahead and take my clips and clip it on. And I was reminded that these are colored on one side and clear on the other. And on the clear side, it's flat. So as it's running your project through your quilting machine, through your sewing machine, it just rides on it nice and flat. And even if you put it this way, it's kind of bumpity. So clear side down. There was a reason for it. Use as many clips as it makes you feel comfortable. I'm going to go ahead and iron this side over so then I can show you how to do the corners. When I'm getting ready to do this side, as I'm doing the next shorter size where I already have one part ironed, I'm just going to go ahead and open this up because I still want to press this whole length half and half. And we'll see if I can iron left-handed. And once again, fold it up on top of my fabric. Just make sure everything's tucked down there. If you went a little bit further past it than you needed to, just make sure your binding is down flat and not sitting on top of the fabric. Sometimes you have to tuck it under a little bit if you took too big of a fold. If it only happened a little bit of too big of a fold in one spot, that's fine. If it's happening regularly, you want to go ahead and reopen it, repress it, and do it again, because otherwise your binding will be going like this. You'll have drunk binding. Add my clips. Okay, everything's all ironed and pressed over, and I put clips everywhere. One of the also things when you're going ahead and use the iron, it's going to give you this crisp edge here, and then when you go to use your sewing machine to stitch all the way around the edge, it's going to make it a lot easier because it'll be laying flat. Now, the hardest part left now is figuring out the corners, and after that, it's a breeze. I've noticed stitching from when you bring your backing up to your binding, it's a lot easier stitching along this edge than when I actually put binding down because you're not matching up anything. It doesn't matter if you have extra lines on the side. You're just stitching here. You're not trying to catch any of the extra pieces or not go onto the binding. I always have the hardest time doing the machine binding that way because I always end up running over the binding instead of hiding it in a ditch. Okay, let's talk corners. Just keep your clips a little bit out of the way. They're nice and movable that way. Now, I've seen some of the tutorials where they talk about folding this corner down and then you can fold over your edges, but I have a hard time getting my mitered corner that way. So what I did on my practice piece is I go ahead and I fold over one side. This took me a little bit of fidgeting to do and a couple of trials to get it. Now remember, we're just folding it right now, so it's really easy to unfold it and refold it. So then I opened up this side, and I took this side and I folded it down to meet the edge here. So that when I refolded this side so that this one raw edge meets the raw edge of the placemat, and then I bring it down, voila, a mitered corner. Imagine that. You have a little bit extra bulk in the corner. Now, some people also say is that you can go ahead, as you fold this, you'll see there's a fold line that goes here and one here. You can imagine a line coming out here and here, and that there's a square. And that you can take from this point of the square to this and cut a diagonal line off. So you're basically cutting off this tip of fabric. I don't do it. It doesn't leave that much bulk in there. And anytime I've tried doing this with other projects, it ends up leaving some type of raw frayed edges that end up in my corner. And I don't get as much of a nice of a miter. So I stick with my full edge here. Sometimes in the corners you might want to go and not bring it straight at this edge here. You might have to go up a little bit further. But as you're folding it over, see this one, when I folded it and I didn't go straight to the edge here, this piece did not fold down all the way to this part here. I just let that kind of fold because that's the natural fold that I creased with my iron. I let it sit there, and when I brought it down, that allowed it to match up into that miter real nice and neat. I can feel the corner, but come on, it's a mitered corner. Even on regular binding, you have that extra fabric there. My sewing machine went over it, no problems. Even with all the hiccups it's been having, it had no problems going over that edge. Then I just slide this down. You're obviously not going to have a miter on the back, of course, because that's just your backing fabric. So let's do the corner one more time over here. Well, we can do it 4 times if you need. I don't mind. I have to do it anyway, right? I just slide my clips out of the way. I allow my one side to be folded over. I gotta say, when I was doing my first 2 corners, everything went smooth. When I got to my 3rd and 4th, it seemed to get a little weird. So let's see how it works out this time. I think it's because of the angle of it, like these 2 are on the same angle, then we went over to the other side, and it messed with my mind a little. So I'm gonna fold this corner over, not quite meeting the edge. Bring my first fold back again, not necessarily meeting the edge either. And then when I bring it back, perfect miter. I'm going to put a clip in it so we don't lose it. Okay, let's go to the 3rd quarter. Okay, so I have my edge folded over. Bring it down, not quite matching the edge. Fold this over. Bring it over. Ah, look at that. Beautiful again. Now, as we're stitching everything down, we'll be pulling this with the machine and just making sure when we get sewing through here that it lines up nice and neat. Let's try the 4th corner. So far, we've been very lucky. Okay, when I got to this corner, this one was already tucked under. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that out and refold this over so that this long one is going all the way over and none of this is tucked under. I think that's where my problem was when I had problems doing my example. So I make sure I have this one going straight to the edge so that it's folded up and it's going all the way past the quilt and I'm all the way up there. So that way when I bring this corner down, tuck this little bit in, I know my fingers are in the way. It's kind of hard to hold it and still let you see everything. And then, okay, so let's try this again. Maybe I keep my fingers out of the way. Have my long length. I fold it over. Okay, fold it over. You can see the space from the edge of my placemat. See this little doohickey up here? I kind of just give him a little fold down. See that? It's like the natural line of the way it wants to fold. And then I just bring it down. Just take this, just fold it over. And my 2 edges met up really nicely, so I got that nice miter corner. So the next step would be going over to the machine. I'm going to go ahead and set it so that I'm running just 1/8 of an inch along this edge. Once again, if you have a fancy stitch that'll fit in here, you could use like a serpentine stitch to just follow along, or maybe you have, now this is a little narrow, so you might want to test it out. Take a scrap piece of fabric and draw 2 lines that are whatever this width is for you, 1/2 inch, and make sure you test out your design to see how it's going to fit in there so you know how it's going to look before you put it on your project, so you don't have to make a 5th placemat. And then you can have them all match, or you can just go ahead and do each one differently. But I'm just going to go ahead and stick with a straight line, 1/8 inch away, I'm going to follow this all the way around. And when I come to my corners, I'm going to go nice and slow. And when I get to here, I'm just going to go 1/8 inch past this edge, and I'm going to pivot and follow it down. And here are my new 4 finished placemats. Let's take a look at them. So I have this red one, and as you saw, I went ahead and just quilted this one squiggly wiggly everywhere. My corners turned out pretty well. It was really easy to stitch the binding down. As I said, I just went and put my presser foot along the edge here, and I have a needle where I can move all the way to the left, so I can just do like a little scant 1/8 inch, and I just stitched it down like that, like you normally would if you were going to use your sewing machine to put binding on a regular quilt. I did not bother with these little mitered corners. If this was a quilt and I was hand stitching it down, I would have gone in and tacked this area down. But since this is from the back, it's not really going to pop open. It's a placemat. I think I'm just going to go ahead and leave it like that. I don't see that there's going to be any problem there. Here's my straight line with the red. Now I did notice when I was just doing the straight line, this one tended to want to move around a little bit, so I gave it a good press and everything's nice and flat now. Once again, the binding looks really nice. It lays nice and flat. It doesn't feel, you know, when you do a regular binding, because you have the layers and you're folding them over, you've got like 2 to 4 layers and 2 to 4 layers or whatever it is, and it feels really stiff. This one, it doesn't feel stiff. I like the way it borders it without kind of being like a picture frame. It just actually still feels part of the actual quilt because it is. And my blue squiggly wiggly wiggly. Now, yes, you can see some shadowing through here. I think it would have been a little bit less, like I said, if I'd used a thicker white fabric, and if I'd gone through and just trimmed the red and blue fabric from the back of the white, because I think part of the shadowing is where it might have stuck out just a little bit past the white, because maybe I didn't have everything lined up exactly right, so I do get a little bit of shadowing there. But I think once everything's washed and it crinkles up, like I said before, it'll all disappear. You can see the quilting on the back on this one. It just really blends in. I just made sure whatever I used in my bobbin here, that I used in my bobbin here, because I used a different color on the back than I did on the front. And my last straight line blue one. I think overall that these will work as a nice set, because everything, it matches in the color. And then we have 2 of the free motion, and we have 2 of the straights. And I think it worked out really well. Now, one of the things I did notice is when I did the free motion, I did tend to stay probably about that inch away from the edge. So most of the time, you see that these stitches did not go into the border. And I noticed also that when I went to trim the batting, and you know, I folded the back of the way and I trimmed the batting just to square it up a little bit, it was a lot easier, because when I had these quiltings, I did go all the way to the edge, so it was really hard to get my scissors in there to trim it. And here you can see where because I did use the matching thread, it's not as noticeable unless you pull it up to your face like this, where my stitching went past the outline from when I stitched down my binding. So I think that if I'm going to do these more, I'm probably going to use the free motion, or I'll go ahead and do the quilt as you go. Now these placemats are really good for quilt as you go, because you would just have to lay down this fabric on top of everything, put down this and sew it, and then you'll already have that quilted line there, and you'll be able to leave this all nice and white and pristine if you want more of the modern look. So if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them down in the comments below, and I'll do my best to see if I can answer them for you. I really enjoyed doing these placemats. They were really a quick and simple project. Other than having to film all the steps for you guys, I think if I were just doing them on their own, you definitely could do them in a day. I'm not sure if it would take you, 2 hours, or if you could do them in less than an hour, depending on if you already had these strips. I had to make these strips ahead of time for you guys, so it all depends. But I think overall it worked out really well, and I think this would be a nice quick project. And with the holidays coming, you can go ahead and get started on them now, and you'll have them all ready for gifts before we even get to December. That's it for me today, and I'll see you next time. Bye!